Okay, so my opponent's topic was about the 3 strikes and you're outlaw. Her main claim was that the 3 strikes and you're outlaw has made a positive impact on the incidence of crime in California. Her supporting claims were the 3 strikes law removes repeat offenders from society. Her second claim was that the 3 strikes law reduces the crime rate in California. And the third one was that the 3 strikes law provides a uniform disposition of criminal cases. So my first counter argument is that the crime rate was already decreasing 4 years prior to the law to the law that was Statistics show that 4 years before the law became effective, crime rates had already decreased by 10%. So, and then also the number of police officers dying while they were working increased also. In 1994, opponents of this law made predictions on what the effects of this law would do. And it came out that more deaths of police officers having to catch more desperate criminals during 8 years prior to the law. 45 officers were killed in the line of duty, while the first 8 years after, 50 were killed. And also, it's massive overcrowding in 33 state prisons. According to Dwayne Brown from KPBS News, the prison population is double the system's capacity, and that's made it together to pay for because the state is overloaded with aging prisoners for life. According to Paul Fings, who was a former district attorney, states that there are statistics that show criminals who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s are not a big threat as they were in their teens, 20s, and 30s. Another claim was that the 3 strikes and you're outlaw was too broad and the subject is emotional. So according to Rose Elizabeth Kitchen, who's a writer and a major in criminal law, she said that some argue that it violates the 8th Amendment of the Constitution. It makes the use of cruel and unusual punishment illegal. Many argue that sentencing a person under the 3 strikes law, if their violation was minor, such as stealing a pizza, violates their 8th Amendment. It's emotional because according to David Rowland, who's an editor for the San Diego City Beat, he mentions in an interview that if you were running for president or something, you had a campaign for smarter criminal justice laws, people would say that you're soft on crime and you would rather have dangerous murderers roaming around the streets and wanting to kill your family. And he also states that whether or not we do something, the federal court system will have to take over, and we'll let people out if we don't do it ourselves. And also, according to an article in San Diego Weekly, the law seems to be unjustly punishing other races more frequently than whites. So African Americans strike out 12 times when compared to Caucasians. 28% of people who are in prison are white, 29% are black. Latinos strike out 78%. More often than whites, and only outnumber whites in prison 37% compared to 28%. So overall, her statement says that the 3 strikes in your outlaw has made a positive impact on the incidence of crime in California. There's also been negative effects. Okay, thank you.
All right, I thought you started off pretty well identifying the claims and the secondary claims, but then once you got to the body of the speech, after that first point where you're talking about the crime data and whether or not 3 strikes had an impact on crime, everything just seems to be you're presenting counterclaims to the general notion of 3 strikes instead of addressing particular issues that the advocate presented. The proof on the police officer deaths increasing as a result of 3 strikes sure sounds, there's a perfect example of a post hoc fallacy. That there were 45 in the 8 years prior and 50 in the 8 years after the passage of the law, but there's no explanation about how many of those were killed by people, for instance, who were trying to avoid being arrested for 3 strikes. You don't even have an example to illustrate that. We've got kind of a hypothetical on that point. The prison overcrowding issue, there's no data that indicates it's related to 3 strikes. There's a whole explanation about how the criminals might be less dangerous once they get older. Again, not necessarily being applied to 3 strikes, but even if it were, does that address the issue that the advocate's talking about the effectiveness of the law? You get into this issue about it being broad and emotional and whether or not there's an 8th Amendment issue, but it's not very clear what position you're taking on that, and you actually sound a little confused on that point. Later on, you're quoting somebody who's talking about what your policy might be if you were going to be arguing if you were running for public office, for instance, and it sounds like you are paraphrasing that person. I'm not sure what inference I'm supposed to be drawing there. You need to give us a declarative statement because it just sits there and it doesn't say anything in terms of what the advocate was arguing or even in terms of what you're arguing. And then the percentage of growth that's occurred in the prisons as a result of 3 strikes needs to be clarified as well. The delivery's a little bit dry. There's too much reading. You never really come across as if you are confident of what the claims are that you're responding to. You seem very uncertain and tentative quite often, and that's going to undermine your credibility in a refutation. All right, thank you.